Hello everybody and welcome to Christian Emotional Recovery, the YouTube channel. I am Rachel Leroy and today I wanted to talk about what's my nervous system got to do with it. And that's a very good question because our nervous system plays a key role in healing trauma and also in when we have trauma that gets stuck in our bodies. And so I wanted to talk about how this works in terms of your body, your nervous system. I keep talking about in the YouTube videos and the podcasts about how when you are releasing trauma, you have to get to it at its source, which is one, where the trauma began, and why you have it, but two, also in the body. And then you want to do the healing exercises, the somatic exercises, the meditation, the journaling, the scriptures, all the body work to help filter that through your neural network. But what do I mean when I say your neural network? What do I mean when I say that your trauma is trapped in your body and in your nervous system and in your brain? So I was going to talk about that today and actually explain the science behind it so you can understand, one, why trauma gets trapped in the body, two, why it can be a challenge for it to be released from the body, and three, why if you have experienced a lot of adverse experiences or trauma or abuse, why you tend to either want to hide and disassociate and just go into this state of being inactive or sort of freeze, or why you might be more prone to anxiety, to activation, and why it's so difficult to get out of fight or flight. And then we'll talk about how to actually work with the nervous system in a way that allows you to be in the ideal state that's in between, where you're more functional, you're socially engaged, you feel like yourself, your mind is clear, you're calm, but you're also alert and active. So let's look at that. Bear with me because I'm going to be looking at my computer a little bit because that's where my notes are. So I will talk to you, but I will also be looking at my computer to read off my notes and my sources. So just a little bit about Christian Emotional Recovery before we get started. Please check out the Patreon, which if you'd like to support this channel and help me to be able to continue to do what I'm doing, because like I said, it does take time, it does take resources, and you're helping me, especially since this does take time out of a regular job. But I also do have a part-time job and I'm training to be a book coach. But you can see Patreon below, and there are different tiers all the way starting from $5 a month, and you can get freebies, well, not freebies, but exclusives that you can't get anywhere else. So check that out. And also check out Christian Emotional Recovery, the Facebook group, and of course, Christian Emotional Recovery, the podcast. It almost sounds like, I don't know if you ever watched the movie Spaceballs, but it was like, Spaceballs the toilet paper, Spaceballs the flamethrower. And then he would say, kids love this one. But I don't have a flamethrower for my branding yet, but maybe one day. The autonomic nervous system has two basic subsystems that we'll talk about today: the parasympathetic nervous system and the sympathetic nervous system. So keep those in mind as we go along: the parasympathetic nervous system and the sympathetic nervous system. So how does that work in regards to trauma? Well, let's take a step back first. In one of the earlier videos, and I will link that one below, I made a book recommendation called The Body Keeps the Score by Porges. And it talks a lot about these states. And so I wanted to get into a little bit of it here. But I've got this article from intuitivehealingnyc.com, intuitivehealingnyc.com. And it can get pretty complicated, but I'm going to try to keep it simple. So basically, you have something called the autonomic nervous system, and it regulates the functions of the body, and it regulates how you react to stress and how you react to your environment, to put it very simply. And within the autonomic nervous system, you have something called the sympathetic nervous system, and you have something called the parasympathetic nervous system. So the state of hyperarousal is what's called the sympathetic state. That can be a little confusing. I know the term sounds positive, but the sympathetic nervous system is activated in the state of hyperarousal. The sympathetic state is when you're hyperaroused, and it's the sympathetic system is activated and it's fight or flight. Now, When you're in a state of hypoarousal, you've got the state of hyperarousal, which is when you're overactivated. That's fight or flight. You've got the window of tolerance, which is when your parasympathetic system is stimulated at an ideal level, and that's the ventral vagal state, when your ventral vagal nerve is activated. And then the lower state is when you want to shut down. It's when animals freeze. Like if you see a certain animal playing dead in the road, that's hypoarousal. They're doing that as a survival mechanism so a predator won't eat them, because they want the predator to think that they're dead. And we do this sometimes as a survival mechanism. For example, I don't want to get too graphic, but if we know we're going to die, our body will go into this state so that, and fill our body with endorphins so that we don't feel as much pain. And so this state of hypoarousal, the state of hypoarousal is when the parasympathetic nervous system is activated. The state of hypoarousal is when the parasympathetic nervous system is activated. I know these terms are difficult, but follow me, stay with me. And then basically you get an extreme decelerated autonomic nervous system response, which means your heart rate goes down, you shut down, if you are in a depression and you're in the bed and you can't get out of bed, if you're crying, if something scares you so much you can't even deal with it or face it, if you're disassociating, if you're numbing, those are all trauma responses that are hypoarousal. That's when your parasympathetic nervous system is activated, and that's when you're below the window of tolerance and you're actually shutting down, also known as a freeze response. Both, you can actually be partly in both at the same time, as strange as that sounds. I don't want to get into this too complicated, but that's the basics of how your nervous system responds to stimuli, to trauma, and to external experiences. And so if you've been in an abusive relationship for a long time, if you had a very unsafe childhood where you were not validated, or where you were yelled at, or where you didn't feel safe, or where you were beaten, or you were sexually abused, or anything horrible like that that a child should never go through, then you're very likely to have used both of these states. But a lot of people tend to go more to one than the other. So start being aware of your body when you're in a situation like that. And then when you're back in a normal state where you feel calmer, reflect on it and think about, was I in a sympathetic activated state of hyperarousal, or was I in a parasympathetic state of hypoarousal with the dorsal vagal state? So if you can think about which of those two you are, then you become aware. And the first step of overcoming and making that window of tolerance larger is to be aware of when you're in one of those states. Now, like I said, there are times when you need to be in those states for your own well-being. But there's also times that you need to, make that window of tolerance larger, and that's the majority of the time. And so this this video isn't so much about ways to do that, but I just wanted you to understand the science behind your nervous system, and how when you experience trauma, if you're constantly in fight or flight, you're reactive, you're angry, you're hyperstimulated, you're jumpy. That's why soldiers with PTSD are so reactive when they hear certain sounds. And then like certain people may cope with pain by taking drugs, and by going and sleeping for 3 days, or by just hiding from the world, numbing their pain. Those are two extreme states of dealing with trauma. And like I said, being more aware of them, you can find that window of tolerance. You can put yourself there more by doing the meditations, the exercises, the reprogramming of the brain, the scripture, the prayer, all of those things. The somatic exercises, especially in the body, is what will help. And there are actual exercises called vagal or polyvagal exercises. And I'm not going to talk about those today, but I do want to do a video in the near future that will talk about some very simple polyvagal exercises you can do. But I would recommend Googling it, look it up on YouTube, read Stephen Porges' book, The Body Keeps the Score, read other reputable books about this that talk about exercises that you can do. Another book that I have gotten into, it's kind of technical and kind of long, but Stephen Rosenberg has a lot of great research and work in this area as well. If you want to try looking at vagal exercises, but even if you're just doing the strategies that I mentioned in the last episodes of season 1, those practices will definitely help you get more in a, that ventral vagal state, and it will also help you to increase your window of tolerance. So, in this video, I wanted to talk about how trauma impacts the nervous system and how that's everything. And I wanted to talk about what the autonomic nervous system is. That's the overall system. Then the parasympathetic and the sympathetic are the two parts, the two responses. One puts you in high alert, one slows everything down, and then you've got that window of tolerance in the middle. And then basically training yourself with specific exercises, becoming aware of when you're in those states, knowing that those states exist, understanding how they impact trauma. All of that can help educate you and help you to learn to widen that window of tolerance to do specific practices. Now, one practice will work better for one person than another, and a practice that worked for you 2 years ago may not work for you now, and an exercise that doesn't work for you now may be great for you in 2 years. So you've got to experiment and educate yourself and learn and read and study and practice. And then when you find something that works, make it a daily practice. And then when you feel like you need to try something else, change it up and make that a daily practice. And just keep on training and learning. The key is to be persistent and resilient and never give up, and to keep pushing forward and to keep opening that window a little more each day. You're not going to see results in a week, but you may feel better in a week. But you'll start to see that window open up when you do those daily practices and you're aware over time, over months. And then over years, you'll see drastic changes in your nervous system where you'll be able to regulate yourself more, control your emotions more, manage your emotions more, be calm more of the time, accept and understand when you're in those other states that that's part of life and that that's okay, and then come back to that happy ventral state more quickly and more naturally. So it's called self-regulation, and we will talk more about self-regulation in the future. But this video has been called What's My Nervous System Got to Do with It? And it's got everything to do with it when it comes to healing trauma in the body. Check out the show notes at the bottom. The resources where I got my research and information are there. You can also find the Patreon account if you'd like to subscribe and support this channel. It'd be greatly appreciated. And also check out the link to the podcast and the link to the Christian Emotional Recovery Facebook group. Thank you so much for following me in this video. I hope it has helped you and I hope you've enjoyed it. God bless you. Remember, you are fearfully and wonderfully made, and God loves you.